Mr. B's history. Now then, people, here we are again, looking at what was the main factor in the development of medicine, treatment of disease, surgery, etc. Number 2 in a series of 8. Can you believe there'll be 6 more after this? The clue as to what we're looking at today is perhaps in the background picture. You'll see people in beds and a big cross and altar at the centre of this building. This is a medieval hospital. So yes, people, we are looking at the impact of religion. So Mr. B's history in this particular series is aimed mainly at GCSE students, but particularly AQA GCSE History students in the Health and the People module, where we're looking at a factors question. How one factor helped or hindered medicine. And of these factors, there are 7. I've already posted one on war. Today we're looking at superstition and the religion, although there is a massive emphasis in mine on religion. And then there's 5 others which we'll get to, surprisingly, in video 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. And then factor 8 will be how to answer a 16-mark question. For those 7 factors, you'll probably in your exam need to write about 2 of them, including the one mentioned in the question, and look at least 2 different time periods. Medicine standstill, beginnings of change, revolution, modern medicine, blah, blah, blah. I know you know it all, but I'm going to say it anyway. And to work out most important, well, we're going to save that to the 8th one. So enough of this. Let's crack on with religion. So the first time period we're going to look at is, broadly speaking, the medieval period, when, according to the exam board, medicine stands still. And when we looked at war, I would agree. I had that picture of Paul Daniels up and not a lot happened. I am not putting a picture of Paul Daniels for this one. It is a picture of St. Bartholomew, who was partly responsible, because he appeared in the vision, to an Englishman who set up St. Bart's Hospital, which is still in existence. Okay, so what do we need to know about when we look at religion in the medieval period? Well, I've come up with this concept of the 5 P's. 3 P's that helped the development of medicine and 2 P's that perhaps hindered it. So what helped? The first one is that the Christian church in Western Europe was responsible for preserving the works of Galen and translating them into Latin. Also the works of various Islamic medical scholars, such as Avicenna. The most significant people involved in this was someone called Constantine the African, who was perhaps a Muslim scholar and trader, who then converted to Christianity and spent his later years translating over 30 Islamic medical works into Latin at the monastery of Monte Cassino in Italy. But not only did it preserve knowledge, the second P is that it promoted the ideas of Galen. Galen was the medical person of choice, according to the church. They liked Galen because when Galen dissected lots of animals, he noticed that the different organs of the body were brilliantly designed to do that job. And so if there's a design, there must be a designer. The Christian church liked the idea of a designer because designer would be called God. So they promoted Galen, but they also were able to promote it through the establishment during the medieval period of about 25 universities with medical schools all across Europe. Oxford, the first university and medical school in Britain, was founded in 1167, so promoting the ideas of Galen. And they provided medical care and social care. They provided almshouses, if you like, old people's homes. They provided homes for scholars, for widows, for sailors, and also, as I said, medical care. There are about 1,200 hospitals in England, of which at least 150 were in Yorkshire alone. So it's clear that the medieval church provided the medical care, but there are aspects where the church hinders. They prohibited the questioning of Galen. through limiting dissection, but also in the case of Roger Bacon, imprisoning him in 1227 when he questioned whether or not Galen was actually right. So they prohibit further development beyond Galen. Remember, Galen is an early Roman famous doctor who treated a number of emperors. And their main treatment, as you saw in that first picture on the first slide on the video of the medieval hospital, their main treatment was prayer, religious devotions. So even when the Black Death hit, the Archbishop of York prescribed devout processions and put a special prayer which would protect you from the Black Death. And so there we are, our 5 Ps, 3 that helped, 2 that hindered. And our conclusion is, or mine is, so it's initially responsible for progress, dissemination and promotion of Galenic ideas, but later hindered, refusing Galen to be challenged. So quite a lot going on in the medieval period. Moving on then, we're going to look at the beginnings of change. So what historians would call the early modern period, from about 1500 to 1800. What things did the church in its broadest sense do to help the treatment of medicine? Remember, it's about focusing on the people of Britain. And I've only really thought about this in the last 6 months or so. So all those people who I've taught in the previous 30 years, I apologise because I didn't tell you this bit. So one of the ways in which the church, religion, helps is it is the centre of practical support for the British people when there is the Great Plague of 1665. It is the parish officers that collected statistics for the weekly bill of mortality, so you could see where the disease was parish by parish. It was the parish that paid for and organised the locking up of sufferers in their houses. They paid the local blacksmith for the chain and the padlock. The church paid for watchers to ensure that no one escaped from these quarantined houses. And they paid people to visit those suffering from the plague. So it's an administrative thing that helps limit the impact and spread of the Black Death. So it's not treatment, it's trying to, I suppose, it is the early modern period's version of hands, face, space. It continues their monopoly of medical education. So they're still training people. However, change is accepted, but really slowly. So when William Harvey came up with his explanation for the circulation of the blood in the mid-17th century, it takes 50 years for the preeminent medical school in Europe, Paris, to teach his ideas of circulation rather than the Galenic ideas of blood generation in the liver. The next thing is that the dissection of bodies was becoming more and more common in Europe, as we will see in another section, perhaps when we look at individuals or communication. Vesalius was able to demonstrate errors of Galen because he was able to dissect the bodies of executed criminals. This seems to have been happening to a small extent in medieval period, but it is becoming much more common. So the church, in a way, does help medical developments progress. Something that they couldn't stop was the dissolution of monasteries in England. Henry VIII shut down all the monasteries, and with that, the vast majority of those 1,200 hospitals, at least 115 in Yorkshire. Most of those were gone. So the entire welfare state structure that the people of Britain had become used to, medical care, old people's homes, care for the poor, had gone. You can understand why people in the north rebelled in something called the Pilgrimage of Grace. However, some hospitals were able to survive because their canny owners, managers, leaders, monks were able to persuade Henry VIII that it was a good idea to endow their hospital, Bart's Hospital, with some land in London so it could continue, and that's what happened. So a fairly mixed picture with the beginnings of change. But I hope you can see that in some ways it's both as positive and as negative as it was in the previous section. Okay, so now we're moving on to the third time period that AQA isolates in their exam, and that's a revolution in medicine, essentially the 19th century. So was there a revolution in the way the church responded to medical progress? Now, in many ways I've found over the years it reasonably difficult to come up with much in terms of help. Although delving a little more deeply into the life of Florence Nightingale, I have put her down as, in a way, linked to religion. This is a bit obscure, and I'm not sure it would go down brilliantly well in the exam, but in the war video, you saw that Florence Nightingale had a significant impact, both in her efforts, the impact of her efforts at the Crimean War, but also in her development of nursing and hospitals across the globe. And why does she want to become a nurse, and why does she want to help people? Well, because in 1837 she sincerely believed that she was instructed by God that that was her duty. So religion made Florence Nightingale set out on the journey that led to significant worldwide medical change. A bit obscure, I agree, but at least we've got one there. How does it hinder? Well, and again, there are some mixed reviews on this point, but essentially, James Simpson, when he introduced the use and pioneered the use of chloroform to ease the pain of childbirth, which Queen Victoria described as delightful beyond measure when she used it during the birth of her 8th child, he was really worried that there'd be a religious backlash, because Genesis chapter 3 verse 16 says, "In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children," i.e. God has ordained that there will be pain in childbirth, and humans shouldn't take that away if God's ordained it. So Simpson wrote a pamphlet saying why this wouldn't be the case. And I don't know if that quelled the concerns. However, the latest historical research said, although there are a few examples of individuals having opposition to the use of chloroform to ease the pain of childbirth, it wasn't very widespread. So whether that's something we can say hinders, it's not very clear. The church again calls for prayer and fasting, not just in response to the Black Death, not just of 1348, not just in response to the Great Plague of 1665, but in response to the cholera outbreak of 1849, as you can see in this letter from the Lord Mayor of Plymouth, because it's God's judgment. So if it's God's judgment, it is a medical thing. So again, you can argue that it hinders. And also, many clergy are involved in the setting up and active campaigning for the Anti-Compulsory Vaccination League in 1866, as they opposed the injection of animal material, i.e. cowpox, into humans. And to be fair, that probably had some negative effect, because in the late 19th century, Compulsory Vaccination Act was passed, but it did allow, for the first time in legal precedence in Parliament, that parents could opt out on moral grounds of vaccination. So again, perhaps it hinders things. Okay, modern medicine, 1900 to the present day. So where are we with what religion focuses on? Well, this clearly goes beyond Britain, and perhaps may therefore be a slightly left field suggestion for health in the nation. But the Catholic Church states that it is the largest non-governmental provider of healthcare services in the world. And you can see from all those stats there, it is a significant supporter and provider of healthcare. Not so much in Britain because we have the National Health Service, but further afield. So even if that may not be something you might want to put an answer about Britain, I think it's important for balance that that's there. However, the modern church is struggling to come to terms with the new gene-based therapies and embryo research. And in some ways they are hindering or just questioning that development. So the Church of England and the Catholic Church have called on politicians to prevent the creation of so-called 3-person babies. Basically, if there's a couple and it's clear that one of them, usually the mother, has a genetic inheritable disease, then gene therapy would allow the genetic material from a third person to be involved in the creation of the baby, so that that inherited disease did not get passed down to the baby. However, because of the church's position on the sanctity of marriage and the importance of marriage, or at least committed couples having children, having a third person genetically involved causes them problems, and so they've called for opposition to that. So into the modern period, the church is still struggling to come to moral terms with the potential that modern medicine can bring. So then, people, where does this leave us? In conclusion, for the last 1,000 years, the church has affected the development of medicine and therefore health of the people of Britain, both in its theory and understanding, preserving Galen, both in its limited training of doctors, but also in its practical provision of healthcare and support during times of epidemic. So you have that during with all the medieval hospitals, and you have that during the Great Plague. Though the degree to which it helped or hindered has changed and varied over time. I would argue that initially in the medieval period, or rather than standing still, it does initially help preserve and promote Galenic medicine. And Galenic medicine is a step forward because it identifies a disease as having a cause which through careful observation and treatment can be cured, even though it's based around the 4 humors and it's wrong. And it also provides widespread medical care across the country with the provision of about 1,200 hospitals. Although the dissolution of monasteries see hospitals destroyed, many people are still helped at a parish level, as emphasised by the plague of 1665 and what parishes does. But as medicine moves beyond the limits of Galen, the church increasingly questions the morality of different developments. And you can look at vaccination, you can look at more modern gene therapy. And so the church starts with promoting and supporting and providing care. That care becomes less widespread and less important to everyday people's lives. And the church today is just one of those places which just says, hang on a minute, think. Now, whether you class that as hindering, I don't know. But a summary of the summary is it helps preserve and promote Galen, but questioned and challenged later developments into the modern day. It remains central to the delivery of practical medical care until the 17th century, but then declined once other non-religious based hospitals were set up. So, I hope that's useful. As ever, if you have any questions or any comments to make it better, just let me know. Looking forward to number 3 out of 8 already, I know.